Well, the Redlands community and beyond continue to grieve as we head into the weekend after that tragic car crash earlier this week. 31-year-old Katherine Leadbetter and her partner, 37-year-old Matthew Field, were killed while they were walking their dog when it's alleged a 17-year-old crashed his car into a truck and rolled, then collided there. Well, there was a petition launched too by members of the public, encouraging the state government to clean up Queensland's Youth Justice Act. That petition's gathered around 150,000 signatures in the space of just 3 days. So are there gaps in how youth crime is dealt with right now? What needs to be cleaned up, if anything? And is there a way to try to prevent incidents like this from occurring in future? Dr. Terry Goldsworthy is an associate professor in criminology at Bond University and a former detective inspector from Queensland Police with 28 years of policing experience to his name. Terry, thank you so much for joining us on a Saturday morning to talk about this. What did you make of this tragic incident when you first heard about it this week?
Look, I think there's a few things that have probably come together and almost, presented us with the perfect storm on some issues around youth crime. And the things I'm talking about there is we had the move by the current government to move 70 the age up to 18. So we had a whole cohort of offenders who then became juveniles. We've had changes in our pursuit policy in recent years to basically a no pursuit policy in almost most circumstances. We've got, a hard core of youth offenders who commit, according to the Attorney General, up to about 45% of all the youth crime. And on top of that, there's been an explosion of unlawful use or stolen vehicles in Queensland over the last 5 years. It is just actually astounding when you look at the figures of the national database as to how our unlawful uses are travelling upwards.
And you can understand the grief and the anger that surrounds an incident like this. But when you're talking about systemic changes, you have to take a step back from any one incident, don't you, to look at what might be effective. People are concerned and want to clean up youth justice. I'm using the phrase that they use, clean up in inverted commas. Do you think that there is a clean up that's required?
Look, I certainly think that this matter's raised some interesting questions that we need to look at. And there's plenty of academics, myself included, who'd be happy to work with the police, the government, and get access to the data and see what is actually happening. And, just some of the issues that I talked to before, for instance, since 2015 in Queensland, we've had a 48% increase in the number of stolen vehicles. If you compare that to the national average is a 5% decrease. So we're well out of sorts with the government. If you look at the rate of stolen vehicles per 1,000 registrations, we've had a 35% increase over that 5-year period, where the national average, was much less. So, we've got a problem with stolen cars in Queensland for some reason. Our cars are no different than every other state, but we have a large problem with stolen vehicles.
And just to clarify, you are talking about Queensland-wide stats there, not just specifically Brisbane?
Yeah, Queensland-wide. So, you've got to kind of ask the question, what's happening there? And this is what I said, these things interlink. So if you have a look at that, then you look at the latest Queensland Crime Report, which is put out by the Office of Treasury. It shows us that when you look at child offending and changes within those kind of offence patterns, if you compare 2018-19 to 2009 and 10, there's an increase of almost 1,800 more offenders, youth offenders, committing unlawful use of motor vehicle offences. So it was the second biggest increase. The only other offence that committed increased more was drug offences. And, youths make up about 40% of our unlawful use offenders. So you've got an increase in stolen vehicles, you've got an increase in youth offending within that crime category. I think if you overlay some of the changes we saw in the Youth Justice Act, we had that extra cohort of 17-year-olds coming in under the Act. We saw the government in 2019 relax the bail law substantially, and they changed that back within 12 months because they realised how problematic it was. But there's still room, I think, to tighten up the Youth Justice Act to capture or to deal with that those hardcore offenders. I mean,
Yeah, you mentioned before a hardcore group that was responsible for, did you say 45% of youth crime?
45%, yeah.
So can you tell me any more about that? Is that specifically is that like break and enter and car theft type offences?
Look, that's all offending. I don't have, it's just a release put out by the Attorney General, so I don't have specifics on it. But what it does inform us is that, you can make changes to the Youth Justice Act to target those repeat offenders and recidivist offenders is what we're looking at. And you won't necessarily catch up. I think people are concerned we're going to capture, Jimmy who commits one offence. I don't think that is the kind of changes that we're looking at. We're looking here to try and stop people who are continually offending. The concern of the public is that there's kind of a roundabout where people just come in.
Yes, the phrase you hear is catch and release, isn't it?
Yeah. And I don't know if that's necessarily true, but there certainly are problems in terms of youths being kept in detention. We don't like to do it. Even when I was a detective inspector back in 2010, you refrain from keeping juveniles in custody as much as you could. So I think...
Because a large proportion of juveniles in detention are on remand, like they haven't actually even gone to court yet, have they?
Yeah, look, I don't have those figures off the top of my head, but I mean, this is what we're talking about, I guess, is, if someone's committing repetitive offences, they should be held in custody till they go to court. That's what I think the argument we're seeing now come from the community. So rather than, someone offending, go back out, to commit more offences, if they do that and they use up their chance, then there's a consequence for that. So, I mean, at the moment, the bar's fairly high. The courts don't necessarily have to keep a child in custody, even if they think they're going to commit another offence. What they have to show is that they think the child is an unacceptable risk to the safety and welfare of the person or the community, and that's a fairly high bar to refuse someone to have bail. The other problem we have is we removed the breach of bail offence for juveniles, which, I've got to say, I think that should be reinstated, because if you're, a 14, 15, 16, 17-year-old and you're released and it's made clear to you what conditions are and you make a decision process to reoffend, then there has to be a consequence for that. I think that we need to go back and revisit that. So
those two key things around the standard met in order to be able to get bail in the first place, and breach of bail idea should be reinstated, in your opinion, for juveniles. Any other key issues that that could be looked at to change, in your opinion?
Look, I think that it'd be worthwhile. I mean, this wasn't a pursuit matter, but I think it's worthwhile checking and looking how the virtual non-pursuit policy that we have in Queensland has affected stolen vehicles. I mean, there's got to be something driving our growth in stolen vehicles compared to the other states. I mean, Victoria's decreased, New South Wales decreased. They still have pursuits. So what is the key difference? Is it the pursuit policy? And now in 2010, we had a coronial inquiry into a number of pursuits that ended with fatal accidents. And yes, there is a risk to pursuits, but the Commissioner at the time, Bob Atkinson, he highlighted that he had concerns and articulated the view that there was a small group of youths who habitually steal cars, and he said that they're likely to vary their behaviour in response to changes to the QPS policy on pursuits, in that they'd be emboldened to drive more dangerously, quicker, if they were aware that there was a restrictive police pursuit policy. So in actual fact, it's a low-risk criminal enterprise for someone to steal a car, because you basically know the police will not be allowed to pursue you. So
another issue to look at there in detail, to really get into those stats if you could. That's what you'd like to do. Thank you so much for speaking to us today, Terry. Appreciate that.
Thanks, Kate. Bye.
Dr. Brisbane.